George Strait, Straight from the Heart, versus Danzig 2, Lucifuge. 360 albums, Tourney. Maybe matchup 29. Doesn't really matter which matchup number. So I had a guest pick out the bottle, and they said it kind of looks like Old West or like Red Dead Redemption or something. So we're going to have some old Ezra 7 while we talk about this matchup. So we're going to start with George Strait, Straight from the Heart, which was submitted by Lincoln Hawk, who lives just a few houses down the road here. And who, if I listen to George Strait in the garage, it's likely going to be his garage. Or I like this album far more than Oceanfront Property, the other George Strait album that's been in 360 albums. Tourney. That was the one, if you remember, it went up against Dire Straits. And Dire Straits ended up advancing. I think this album would have fared much better in that matchup. This album, quite a few times reminded me of Jimmy Buffett. I could kind of see them being influences on each other. I think this album came out in 1982, so it's got some age on it. There were also times that it reminded me of Garth Brooks, and this album predates Garth Brooks, so I suspect that George Strait was a big influence on Garth Brooks. I didn't really retain any of the names. The Amarillo song, that's probably my favorite on this album. I know Honky Tonk's in one of the titles, and I love honky tonk music, but there wasn't a whole lot of honky tonk I heard. It's still kind of a cleanly produced album, but like I compared it to some modern stuff that I historically wouldn't gravitate towards too, but my son's got me enjoying some of the Zach Bryan that's popped up on some of his playlists at Shuffle. And I thought the Zach Bryan, I test drove some Zach Bryan on the way home compared to the George Strait, and the Zach Bryan sounded quite a bit better. Pulled up Morgan Wallen, who I do not care for, and who Lincoln Hawks had on his garage, and I feel like I'm undergoing cruel and unusual punishment when that's on, and it still sounded heinous. So George Strait, Straight from the Heart, is infinitely better than Morgan Wallen. For me, everybody's got their own palate for music, just like they have their own palate for bourbon. And when I make these references to other bands and stuff, I'm not saying, that anybody else could hear that, but that's what I hear from my own musical palate. But I like this album quite a bit. Now, Lincoln Hawk told me that I'm going to have to suspend my metal bias for some of these matchups, and he was talking about matchups like this one, because George Strait is going up against Danzig, and not only Danzig, who's one of my favorite artists, like the first half of his discography, but Danzig 2, which may be my favorite Danzig album. I don't know. It goes back and forth between that and Danzig 1. And I'm going to go ahead and go on record that this may be the best blues metal album of all time. Let me know what you think is a better blues metal album. And there's some other ones that pop in my head. But there is so much, speaking of palette, there's so much Howlin' Wolf and Leadbelly influence on this album. And it's a metal album for sure. But there's the heavy, heavy, heavy blues influence. I couldn't get enough of this album the past few days. I listened to the George Strait album I listened to over 40 songs. And Danzig's probably closer to twice as many. And I feel like I could have listened to it nonstop for the past 72 hours and just been happy to do so. This is one of those albums that's a dark horse to go really deep in the 360 albums tourney, Danzig 2, Lucifuge. When I was listening to it, I was like, the past few days, that album could have matched up against every other album in this tournament, including albums like Master of Puppets, which if I had to pick a favorite, just off the top of my head, I think Master of Puppets is going to be a very difficult out. But there's been surprises so far. But Danzig 2, Lucifuge, it's another one of those albums. There's no skips. And when I'm in the mood for it, it just sounds incredible. So, obviously, advancing to the round of 180 is Danzig 2, Lucifuge. Tell me, are you a big George Strait fan? Am I just bonkers for not liking Morgan Wallen. Or is it Whalen? No, it's not Whalen. It's Wallen. Zach Bryan's pretty good, though. But he's not in the tournament that I know of. Maybe he is. So let me know. And if you're having a pour, what's your pour? Including stuff that is non-alcoholic. Cheers.